The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dust, the same scent that once clung to my childhood memories. As I stepped out of my truck, the gravel crunched under my boots. The same driveway I'd walked 1,000 times beside my father. 10 long years had passed since I left this ranch. 10 years since I watched my father's hands, calloused and strong, build a life out of this dirt. And now the first sight that greeted me on my return was not the old oak tree or the barn I grew up fixing, but a stranger's finger pointed right in my face. "You don't belong here anymore," she said, her voice shaking but full of arrogance. "This is HOA land now." Her name was Karen, and even before she said another word, I knew exactly the kind of person she was, someone who wore power like cheap perfume and expected everyone to choke on it. Behind her stood a line of neighbors, 6, maybe 7 of them, arms crossed, faces set in smug certainty. They looked like soldiers guarding a queen who had crowned herself. For a long moment, I said nothing. The only sound was the wind brushing through the grass and the soft creak of the old fence that marked my father's boundary. Then I saw it, a metal sign freshly hammered into one of the wooden posts. Disputed boundary? That sign hit harder than her words. My father built that fence with his bare hands. Every plank, every nail carried his sweat. There was no dispute, not legally, not morally. Only the nerve of someone who thought she could rewrite history to suit her fantasy. Karen stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the dry air. "I've already called the authorities," she announced, loud enough for her little audience to hear. "You'll be removed today." I studied her for a second, the way she squared her shoulders, the way she wanted me to argue, to lose my temper. I'd seen her kind before, power-hungry on paper, hollow in truth. I took a slow breath and said evenly, "Karen, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." She smirked, as if I'd confirmed everything she wanted to believe, that she was in charge now. Right on cue, the sound of tires rolling down the gravel road echoed behind me. A police cruiser. Dust billowed around it like smoke glinting in the sunlight. Karen folded her arms and whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Finally, now you'll see what happens when you mess with the HOA." The cruiser came to a stop. 2 men stepped out dressed in uniforms that looked off. No shine on the boots, no patches on the sleeves, no badges on their belts. Even from 20 feet away, I could tell something wasn't right. One of them adjusted his hat nervously. The other scanned the crowd like a man pretending to know what to do. Karen strutted toward them, heels crunching against the gravel, pointing at me like she was the sheriff of some forgotten town. "Officers, arrest him! He's trespassing on HOA property." The taller one gave me a glance, a quick, uncertain look, then muttered, "Ma'am, we'll handle it." But his voice lacked authority. It was shaky. Wrong. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Aged, yellowed, but powerful in its truth. I held it up for everyone to see. "This," I said calmly, "is the deed. Signed, sealed, and notarized. This land is mine." Karen's smile cracked, just a little. "That paper means nothing," she snapped. "The HOA rules override everything here." "Funny thing about rules," I said, stepping closer so the wind carried my words. "They don't mean much when the people enforcing them aren't even real cops." That one sentence rippled through the crowd like lightning. The neighbors glanced at the fake officers. Whispers spread. One man frowned. "They don't look like cops." Karen's face reddened. "Don't just stand there," she barked at the imposters. "Do your job." The taller one swallowed hard and stepped toward me, hand twitching near his belt. I let him come closer, close enough to smell the cheap leather of his fake holster, before I pressed a button on my phone. A loud beep echoed across the yard. Then came the playback, my own voice, and hers. "If you set foot on my land," I'd recorded earlier, "you'll be arrested for impersonating law enforcement." Every word was clear. Every threat she'd made, every lie she'd told, recorded. The crowd gasped as the truth hit them like a hammer. Karen's face drained of color. You can't do that," she stammered. I took one slow step closer, lowering my voice just enough that only she and her so-called cops could hear. Actually, I said, I can. And you've just walked into a trap you'll regret for the rest of your life. She lunged toward me, trying to snatch my phone. But before she could touch me, another sound cut through the moment. Deep, heavy tires on gravel. Everyone turned. This time it wasn't a rusty old cruiser. It was a real county sheriff's truck, black and silver, lights flashing softly in the daylight. The crowd shifted, murmuring. The fake cops froze like statues. Karen's face fell completely. She forced a laugh that came out as a broken cough. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, waving toward the truck. "Finally, someone real." "Arrest him immediately. He's trespassing." The door of the truck opened, and out stepped a tall man in a beige uniform, a silver badge gleaming under the sun. His posture spoke of authority. His eyes, calm, confident, scanned the scene, then landed on me. "Welcome back," he said, voice low and steady. "It's been a while." Karen blinked, her confidence faltering. "Wait, you know him?" The sheriff's gaze hardened as he looked at her. "Of course I do. This is the rightful owner of this ranch. His father built this land before most of you even lived here." A stunned silence fell over everyone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Karen's mouth fell open, her fake cops staring at the ground. That can't be right," she whispered. "The HOA, we have control." The sheriff shook his head slowly. "Not out here, you don't." And just like that, everything she had built, every lie, every threat, began to crumble. The silence after the sheriff's words was heavy enough to choke on. Karen's face went pale, and the little crowd behind her began to shrink, physically, emotionally, realizing that the self-proclaimed queen of their HOA had just been stripped of her crown. The sheriff adjusted his hat, squinting toward the sunlit horizon. "Ma'am," he said in a calm, authoritative tone, "you and your people need to step off this property immediately." Karen stuttered. This can't be happening." "We have minutes from the board meetings, boundary updates, maps." He raised a hand. "None of that means a thing out here. This isn't HOA jurisdiction. This ranch and everything on it are registered under his family's name, going back 57 years. The murmurs in the crowd turned into quiet disbelief. A woman whispered to her husband, 57 years? That's before this whole subdivision even existed." Karen tried to recover. "You don't understand, Sheriff. We were expanding our community walking trail. The property lines—" I cut her off, voice steady but edged with fire. "You didn't expand a walking trail. You built your patio over my father's land. You dug up our boundary markers, tore down our fence, and now you're trying to pretend this was all a misunderstanding." The sheriff nodded grimly. "That's destruction of private property, ma'am. And if those two over there were pretending to be law enforcement," he glanced toward the imposters who were now visibly sweating, "then we've got a much bigger problem." Karen's officers suddenly found the ground fascinating. They didn't speak. The sheriff called for backup on his radio. The sound of static filled the air like distant thunder. Karen's hands trembled. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded. "We can fix this quietly. No reason to make it public." That was the moment I smiled for the first time that day. "Oh, it's already public," I said. "You and your fake cops are on 3 different security cameras right now." Her jaw fell open. You recorded all of this?" I nodded. Every word. Every lie. The sheriff's backup arrived within minutes. 2 more cruisers, real ones this time. They took the impersonators aside and started questioning them. One of them, nervous and guilt-ridden, cracked within seconds. "She told us she was the HOA president," he confessed. "Said the owner sold the land years ago, and we just had to scare him off." The look on Karen's face when she realized her allies had just sunk her case was something I'll never forget. That iron confidence melted into panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The sheriff shook his head. "Ma'am, you're lucky this man's calm. Otherwise, you'd be leaving in handcuffs right now." Karen's shoulders slumped. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't mean," but I stopped her. "Save it." You knew exactly what you were doing. The crowd had started to thin. A few neighbors, ashamed, avoided my eyes. One elderly man, a kind soul I remembered from childhood, walked up and gently touched my arm. "Son," he said softly, I knew your dad. He was a good man. You don't let them take this land from you. You hear? That hit deep. I nodded. I won't. The sheriff clapped me on the shoulder. We'll file the report and get a surveyor out here to mark the line again. You'll get official documentation from the county. Karen tried to object one last time. But our HOA plans, the sheriff cut her off sharply. Plans end at the county's border. You don't have authority here, and you never did. He turned back to me. You'll be hearing from the county in a few days. Until then, I suggest putting that fence back up, strong and high. Don't worry, I said, glancing at Karen. This time it's going to be taller. That earned a few nervous chuckles from the remaining neighbors. Karen turned away, humiliated, and marched back toward her house, her heels kicking up small clouds of dust with every angry step. That night, I sat on the porch of the ranch house, staring at the horizon as the sun melted into a blood-orange sky. The land looked peaceful again, quiet. But beneath that peace there was anger, the kind that didn't fade easily. My father had once said, land doesn't just belong to you. You belong to it. Protect it, and it'll protect you. I understood that now. I called a contractor I knew from years back, a quiet, reliable man named Mark. He didn't ask questions, just said, "When do you need the crew?" "Tomorrow," I answered. "And bring extra concrete." The next morning, trucks rolled in at sunrise. The sound of hammers, drills, and saws filled the air again, like the heartbeat of the ranch returning to life. We worked from dawn to dusk, rebuilding the fence post by post, plank by plank. This time, I added something new, a wall of solid cedar boards, 8 feet high, sealed tight with steel anchors, and in the middle of it, I left space for a sign. Karen watched from her backyard as we built it. Every time she stepped out, I could feel her glare burning through me. But she didn't dare come closer. Not after what happened. Not after the sheriff made it clear that her empire stopped at that fence line. By the third day, the wall was done. It stood tall and unshakable, a monument not just of wood and nails, but of defiance. I hung the sign myself, the letters carved deep and bold. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I didn't stop there. I filed a full civil complaint through my lawyer. The footage, the false impersonations, the damage, everything went into the report. The lawyer said quietly, "You know this could cost her a fortune." "I'm counting on it," I said. That night, as I locked the gate and turned toward the quiet house, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "Karen, we can still settle this privately. No need to drag everyone into court." I didn't reply. Instead, I looked out over the land, my father's land, and made a promise under the stars. This wasn't over. She wanted war? She'd just declared it on the wrong man. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin, in court. The morning sun broke through my window, sharp and golden. It wasn't the kind of morning that brought peace. It brought purpose. Today wasn't about rebuilding fences or standing my ground. Today was about exposing every lie Karen and her fake HOA had built their little kingdom on. By 9 a.m., I was in my lawyer's office, sitting across from a man who'd seen every kind of land dispute in the county. His name was Franklin, older, calm, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. He adjusted his glasses and said, "You've got one hell of a case here. Fraud, impersonation, property damage, this woman's been running a full-scale scam." I nodded. "How many people did she take money from?" He opened a file, flipping through pages of payment receipts, false invoices, and meeting notes. "Over 40 homeowners," he said. "Monthly dues, fines, even special maintenance fees. All of it going straight into an account under her name." "Not the HOA's?" I asked. He shook his head. "There is no HOA. She made the whole thing up." That made my jaw tighten. 10 years away from home, and this was what had grown in my absence, a web of lies stretched over good people who never questioned authority. Franklin looked at me for a moment and added, "You ready to go public with this?" I nodded once. "Let's end this." 2 weeks later, the courthouse was packed. Locals, reporters, curious neighbors, everyone wanted to see the showdown. Even the sheriff showed up, standing quietly in the back. Karen arrived last, flanked by a defense attorney who looked about 10 years younger than me and 10 shades more nervous. When the judge walked in, the room fell silent. He was a tall man with gray hair and a slow, measured voice. "Case number 2143, Thompson versus Hayes Homeowners Association," he began. "Your Honor," Franklin said smoothly, rising to his feet. "Correction. There is no legal HOA. The defendant fabricated it." That got the judge's attention. He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Karen shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. Franklin continued. "We will demonstrate that the defendant created a fictitious organization, collected unauthorized payments, and unlawfully attempted to seize private property belonging to my client, the rightful owner of Thompson Ranch." Karen's lawyer stood up quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. My client was acting under the belief that—" The judge interrupted. "Belief doesn't make it legal, Counselor." "Continue, Mr. Franklin. The first piece of evidence went up on the projector. A screenshot from my security footage." There she was, standing at my fence line, finger in my face, shouting that it was HOA land now. The room gasped. Then Franklin played the audio recording. Karen's voice echoed through the speakers, commanding her officers to remove me. The moment she realized those weren't real police, you could see her whole expression change, from triumph to fear. The judge leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "Mrs. Hayes," he said slowly, "did you call these men?" Karen's voice shook. "They told me they were off-duty officers." "I thought—" The judge raised a hand. "You thought wrong." Franklin switched to the financial evidence. He placed several documents on the table, each a receipt signed by Karen herself. Payments marked as HOA improvements, enforcement fees, and community dues. "Your Honor," he said, "the total amount collected exceeds $80,000, none of which can be traced to any registered HOA entity." The judge frowned deeply. "Mrs. Hayes, where did this money go?" Karen's voice cracked. I used it to maintain the neighborhood." "Landscaping, events," Franklin interrupted calmly. "You mean the backyard barbecues you hosted every month?" "Paid for with residents' dues?" A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Even the judge couldn't hide a smirk. Karen's lawyer tried to recover, but the damage was done. Every lie, every false invoice, every threat she'd issued, it all came out one by one. By noon, the courtroom felt like it was suffocating under the weight of her deception. Then came the sheriff's testimony. He stood straight as ever, hat in hand. I arrived on scene that day after a report of trespassing. What I found were two men posing as officers and Mrs. Hayes attempting to evict the rightful property owner. We confirmed through county records that the ranch has remained under Mr. Thompson's ownership since 1968. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sheriff." By the time Franklin rested our case, there wasn't a person in that room who didn't know the truth. Karen's empire wasn't an organization. It was a scam built on fear and fake rules. The defense tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, but the evidence spoke louder than words. Karen's face was drained of color. She looked smaller, fragile, a queen watching her castle burn down. The judge leaned back and sighed. "I've seen a lot in this courthouse, but I've never seen anyone impersonate an HOA on this scale. Mrs. Hayes, this county doesn't recognize your authority. Your actions are fraudulent and unlawful." He paused, his gavel hovering midair. "Judgment in favor of the plaintiff. Full restoration of property, financial restitution of $80,000, and pending criminal charges for impersonation and fraud." The gavel came down hard. Bang! The courtroom erupted. Whispers, gasps, a few quiet claps from the back. Franklin turned to me and gave a small nod. Karen's lawyer slumped in his chair. She stared straight ahead, eyes glassy, lips trembling. When the hearing ended, she stood up slowly. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of the entire town." I looked her dead in the eye. "No, Karen, you embarrassed yourself." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just turned and walked out, her heels echoing like fading thunder. Outside the courthouse, the sheriff met me by the steps. "You did right, son," he said. "Your dad would have been proud." I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs. "It's not just about the land anymore," I said. "It's about reminding people that no one's above the truth." He nodded. "That fence you built, keep it standing. Some people need to see where their power ends." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry. It's not just a fence anymore. It's a message." As the crowd began to disperse, a few neighbors approached, the same ones who once followed Karen. They apologized, genuinely this time. "We didn't know," one of them said. She made it sound so official. I simply replied, "That's how control works. It always sounds official until you ask for proof." They nodded, humbled, and walked away. The sun was dipping behind the courthouse by the time I got into my truck. The fight wasn't over yet. There were still civil suits, payments to recover, and a community to rebuild. But for the first time, I felt peace. The ranch was mine again. My father's legacy was safe, and Karen's lies had finally met their end, under the same law she tried to twist. Tomorrow, I'd return home to rebuild, to restore, and to remind everyone that truth always finds its way through the cracks. The drive back to the ranch that evening felt different. The air was lighter, the roads calmer, and every turn on that old dirt path carried the weight of history, my father's, and now mine. When I pulled up beside the gate, the sun was sinking low, casting long golden shadows across the cedar wall we'd built just days earlier. For the first time, that fence didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like protection. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching over gravel, and leaned against the wooden post. The land stretched before me, silent and endless, the same as it had always been. But tonight, it meant something new. This wasn't just property. It was a promise kept. Mark, the contractor who helped rebuild the fence, was waiting near the barn. He waved. "Heard the verdict?" he called out with a grin. "She didn't stand a chance, did she?" I shook my head. "Not against the truth," he laughed. "Well, the whole town's talking. Folks are saying it's the biggest takedown since that county tax scandal." I smiled faintly. Let them talk. I just want peace now. We walked toward the barn, the boards creaking under our steps. Inside, the air smelled of dust, hay, and old memories. My father's tools still hung neatly on the wall, untouched since the day I left. I reached up and ran my hand across one of his old hammers, the metal cool beneath my fingers. Mark glanced around. "You ever think about reopening this place? Could make good money again, small ranch, local tours, maybe a produce line." "Maybe someday," I said softly. "But for now, I just want to bring it back to life." He nodded. That's a good start. When he left, the quiet settled in again. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty. It was earned. I sat on the porch watching the lights of the town flicker in the distance and thought about everything that had happened. Karen's arrest had made headlines across the county. The sheriff's report revealed everything. Fake officers, stolen funds, impersonation, the entire fraudulent HOA she built from scratch. She faced multiple charges, and the state had already frozen her assets. Her so-called supporters turned witnesses overnight, each one confessing how they'd been manipulated by her promises of control and order. It was over, but even in victory, I couldn't help but think of how easily it had all spiraled. How a community could be twisted by fear, by one person's hunger for power. That was the part my father had always warned me about. Land's not dangerous, son. People are. When they start thinking they own more than their share of it. I understood him completely now. The next morning I woke early, the first light breaking across the hills. I brewed coffee, stepped outside, and watched mist roll through the valley. Birds sang in the cottonwoods, and somewhere far off a coyote called, the same sound I remembered as a kid when my father would wake me before sunrise. I smiled to myself. It felt like home again. By noon, a few neighbors drove up, the same ones who'd once followed Karen's orders without question. This time, their heads weren't high. They were humble, eyes full of regret. A woman named Linda spoke first. "We came to say sorry. We were scared to speak up. Karen told us you were dangerous, that you'd abandoned this land." I nodded slowly. Fear makes people believe lies. You're not the first and you won't be the last. Another man stepped forward. We want to help rebuild the trail. Properly this time. The right way within the boundary. That made me pause. For a moment I thought about refusing, about keeping my land completely private forever. But then I remembered what my father used to say. The land's big enough for everyone, as long as they respect it. I nodded. All right, but this time we do it together. No more fake rules, no more titles. Just neighbors. Their relief was almost visible. Smiles returned. The tension that had divided us for months melted like frost under morning sun. They brought shovels, posts, and even food. We worked side by side, rebuilding the trail, repairing old fences, and repainting the barn. Laughter replaced suspicion. It wasn't just land being fixed. It was trust. By sunset, the new fence gleamed in the light. The sign still hung firm, private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But beneath it, I added a smaller plaque. Welcome to Thompson Ranch, built on honor, reclaimed with truth. When I stepped back and looked at it, it felt complete. A week later, the sheriff stopped by again. Heard about the trail, he said, smiling. Looks like peace is settling in. Yeah, I replied. Feels strange, doesn't it? He nodded. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. Before he left, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a folded document, the official restoration of deed verification. This is yours, he said. Legally, fully, permanently. I held it carefully, the county seal stamped across the bottom. 10 years away, and it took one storm to remind me what mattered most. That night, I walked along the fence line under the stars. The land was quiet again, bathed in silver light. I could almost feel my father's presence beside me, not haunting, just watching. Proud. I did it, Dad, I whispered. The ranch is safe. Your work lives on. A soft wind swept through the grass, and for a second, it felt like the land was answering. I stood there for a long time, staring into the dark hills, listening to the sound of night settling in, the sound of peace returning home. And as I turned back toward the house, the lights glowing warm in the windows, I thought about everything this fight had taught me. That sometimes, justice doesn't need anger, it just needs patience. That people who build power on lies will always crumble when truth walks in the door. And that no matter how long you've been gone, home will always wait, quietly, faithfully, for you to come back and make things right. The Thompson Ranch wasn't just land. It was legacy, and this time, I wasn't going anywhere. If you enjoyed this story of real-life justice and calm revenge, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. This has been another powerful tale from HOA Story Files, where every story reminds us that truth, patience, and courage always find their way home. Stay tuned for more unbelievable stories of justice, mystery, and retribution. Until next time, this is HOA Story Files signing off.